Hello and welcome back to the drag and drop inventory tutorial for Ren'Py part 2, and let's just jump straight back into it, shall we? So in the last part of the tutorial we created some environment sprites instead of this setup scene 1 label, and then we added those sprites to this scene 1 screen. In this part of the tutorial we are going to add the inventory as well as the inventory button. So let's go ahead and create the inventory button first. So we're going to create a few empty lines up here, and then we're going to say screen UI, and then first we're going to add the button background image, and the images for this is inside of the UI subfolder of the images folder, and the background image for the inventory button is this inventory icon bg.png. So we're going to say image UI inventory icon bg.png, like so. And we're going to position this image at xpos of 0 and ypos of 0.8, like so. And for the button we're going to create an image button, so we're going to say image button, and then we're going to use the auto property to make sure that Ren'Py finds our idle and hover versions of the image automatically. And then we're going to say UI slash inventory icon, and then we're going to do a %s and then write .png, like so. And then this is going to be positioned at xpos of 0.03 and ypos of 0.825. And then we also want to make sure that we are making this image button half its size, so we're going to say at half size. And let's also make sure that we do that for this image above as well, so we're going to say at half size. And the last thing we're going to do with this screen for now is to add a set order property to it, and that is going to make sure that this screen is showing in the correct order. So we're going to say set order and 1, like so. And now we can go ahead and add the inventory screen. So we're going to create a few empty lines under here, and then we'll say screen inventory. And the first thing we're going to add in here is going to be the inventory background image. So we're going to say image, and the file name for that is going to be inventory bg. So we're going to write UI slash inventory bg.png, like so. And this one is going to have the x position of 0.17 and the y position of 0.8, like so. And then let's also make sure that we are resizing this to half its size, so we'll say at half size. The next one is going to be another image, and this one is going to be the actual slots that goes inside of the inventory. So we're going to say image UI slash, and this one I have called inventory slots, so we're going to write inventory slots.png, like so. And this one should have the xpos of 0.274 and the ypos of 0.845, like so. And then we're going to transform this as well, so we're going to say at half size. And now we're going to add the two inventory buttons that should be available at either side of the inventory, and these are going to help the user to reveal more items in case they have gathered more than the available slots. And to do that we are first going to create two new variables, and these are going to hold the value of either false or true, and then we're going to use these variables to determine if we want to use the enabled or the disabled versions of the images. So we're going to scroll back down into the start label, and then we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say inventory RB, which stands for right button, enabled is equal to, and then we're going to say false as a default value. And then we're going to duplicate this line, and then we'll swap the RB for LB, and this is also going to have false as the default value. And then we can scroll back up into the inventory screen, And then we're going to say image button idle. And now in order to determine which image we want to use, we're going to use the Ren'Py Python function called if. So we're going to say if and then 2 brackets like so. And then we're going to say inventory RB enabled is equal to true. So now we're checking if the inventory right button is enabled, and then we're going to add a comma, and then we're going to say true is equal to. So if this condition is true and the inventory right button is enabled, then we're going to use the idle enabled version of the right button. So we're going to create 2 quotation marks like so, and then we'll say UI/inventory arrow right enabled idle.png like so. And then we're going to add the image that should be if it's disabled. So we're going to do a comma, and then we're going to say false is equal to UI inventory arrow right disabled.png like so. And then we're going to do the same thing with the hover version. So we're going to say hover if inventory RB enabled is equal to true, and then a comma, and then we'll say true is equal to 2 quotation marks UI/inventory arrow right enabled hover.png. And then we'll go ahead and add the disabled version in case this condition is false. So we're going to say false is equal to UI inventory arrow right disabled.png like so. And then we're going to add an action for this image button, and this action is going to call a Python function which is going to handle what is going to happen when the user clicks on this button. So we're going to say action function, and the function we are going to call inventory arrows, and we're going to send in 1 parameter to this function which is going to determine which button that we had just clicked. So we're going to say button is equal to right like so. And then we can duplicate this line, and now we're just going to make sure that we are changing all of the right button references to left button instead. So we're going to say LB like so, and then we'll do the same thing inside of these strings, left, and here as well. So once that is done, we're going to go ahead and add the transform to these image buttons as well. So we're going to say at half size, and the same down here, at half size. And then we're going to position these on the screen. So this first one, the right button, is going to have the XPOS of 0.921 and YPOS of 0.86 like so. And then the left one is going to have the XPOS value of 0.202 and YPOS of the same as the other one, so it's going to be 0.86. So now let's go back up into the UI screen, and in here we're going to add an action for our inventory button, and we're going to check if the inventory is already showing or not, and if it's not, then we can go ahead and show it as the user is clicking on this button. But if it's showing, then we want to go ahead and hide it instead. So we're going to say action, and then we're going to use the Ren'Py Python if function. So we're going to say if, and then the condition that we want to check for is going to be Ren'Py dot get screen. So this get screen method of the Ren'Py object will check if the screen that we have passed in as a parameter to this method is currently showing or not. And if it's not, then it's going to return a none value. But if it is, then it's going to return the value true. So we're going to add 2 quotation marks, and then we're going to say inventory, and then we're going to say is equal to none. So as long as this inventory screen is not showing, then we're going to say true is equal to show inventory, like so. But now if this inventory screen is showing, then we're going to say false is equal to hide and then inventory, like so. Next, we're going to make sure that this UI screen is showing at the start of the game. So we're going to scroll back down into the start label. And in here, we're going to create a new line above this jump setup scene 1 statement. And then we're going to say show screen UI, like so. Next, we need to make sure that we are creating the function that we have supplied to the 2 inventory buttons, which we have called inventory arrows. And this is so that we don't get an error as soon as we launch the game. So we're going to go up here into the init Python block, and we're going to say def inventory arrows, and then we're going to add the argument, which we have named button. So we're going to say button, and then inside of here we can add the pass statement for now, and then we're going to add some real code to this later on. So let's go ahead and save our changes now and then launch the game to see what this looks like. So now that we are back inside of the game again, we can see at the bottom left corner that the inventory button is indeed showing, and we can also see that if we hover over it, we get this highlighted version of the image. So now let's go ahead and try to click on this button to see if the inventory will show up. And as we can see, it does indeed work, as we get the inventory here, and we have the slots in the middle, and then the 2 inventory buttons at either side. And then if we click on the inventory button again, we can see that the inventory is hidden. So that is working as we want it to. So now let's go back into the code and see what else we can do. So the next thing we're going to do is to make sure that the environment items is able to be interacted with in various ways, such as when the user hovers a cursor over one of these items bounding boxes, then that item's image should change to the hover version of the image, and then when they move away from that item, it should go back to the idle version. And to do that, we're going to use this environment events function, and it is inside of this event argument that the current event type is stored. So we're going to check against this to see if the current event is a mouse movement, and if it is, then we're going to check if the mouse is hovering over one of the items. So we're going to say if event dot type is equal to, and to check if the current event type is a mouse movement, we're going to say Ren'Py dot pygame underscore SDL2 dot, and then in all caps we're going to say mouse motion, like so. So if the current event is a mouse motion, then we're going to loop through all of the items inside of the environment sprites list, and we're going to check if the cursor is within one of these bounding boxes. So we're going to say for item in environment sprites, and then we're going to say if item dot x is less or equal to x, and x is also less or equal to item.x plus item.width. So what are we actually doing here? Well, we're checking if the item's x position is less than the mouse cursor's x position on the screen, and if the mouse cursor's x position is also less or equal to the item's x position plus its width. And if it's true, then the mouse is within the item's bounding box on the x-axis, but we also need to be able to check if the cursor is within the bounding box on the y-axis to make sure that it's truly hovering over the item. So we're going to say and item dot y is less or equal to y, which is the mouse cursor's y position, and y is also less or equal to item.y plus item.height, like so. And now inside of this if statement, we are going to swap the idle image for the current item in the for loop to the hover image instead. And to do that, we are first going to create a new transform, which is going to help us to resize the hover image to half of its original resolution. So we're going to say T for transform is equal to transform, and then we're going to say child is equal to item.hover image. So now we are using the hover image attribute for this item in order to access its hover image. And then we're going to say zoom is equal to 0.5, like so. And then now we also need to make sure that we are adding this transform as a child to the current item in the for loop. So we're going to say item.setChild, and then we're going to pass the transform as the parameter to this method. And then now, since we have changed this sprite's child, we also need to make sure that we are redrawing the environment sprite manager in order for this change to take place. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say environment sm.redraw, like so. And then we should pass in the value 0 into this method, which means that we don't want the redraw method to run again after a certain amount of time, but we only want it to run once now. And then we're going to make sure that if the cursor is not over the current item in the for loop, that we are resetting its image to the idle image again. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say else, and then we're going to do the same thing as we did here. So I'm going to copy this and paste it down here, and then we're just going to make sure that we are changing the hover to idle instead, like so. And then we're going to make sure that we are saving our changes, and then we can launch the game to see what this looks like. So now inside of the game, let's go ahead and hover our cursor over one of these items in the scene to see if it's going to change its image to the hover version instead of the idle version. And as we can see, it does indeed work for these door vines, and it works for this box and the key and the lantern. So now that we know that this works, let's go back to our script and continue with the coding. The next thing we're going to do is to make sure that these environment items can be clicked on in order for different things to happen. And to do that, we're going to create a new if statement, and this if statement is going to check if the event is of a mouse button up type. So we're going to create a new line underneath here, and then we're going to go inwards in the indentations until we hit the same line as this if statement. And then we're going to say elif event type is equal to, and then we can go ahead and copy paste this line, like so. And then we're going to change the mouse motion for mouse button up, like so. So this if statement is checking if the event that just happened was a mouse button release. And if it is, then we're going to check if the mouse button that was just released was the left button. And to do that, we're going to say if event dot button is equal to 1. And then inside of this if statement, we're going to create a for loop. And this for loop is also going to iterate through the environment sprites in order to check if the mouse cursor is within any of the items inside of the environment sprites. So for that, we can actually go ahead and copy paste these two lines up here. So we're going to copy this, and then we'll paste it underneath here, like so. And inside of this if statement, we're going to check what the current item's type is, and then we're going to determine what to do when the user has clicked on this item. So we're going to say if item dot type is equal to, and let's go with key for the first one. So essentially, if the item that we have just clicked on is the key, then we want to go ahead and add this key to the inventory. And to do that, we are going to call a function that we haven't created yet, and we're going to call this function addToInventory. So that function is going to be the one that we are calling every time we want to add an item to the inventory. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say addToInventory. And this function is going to take one parameter, and that is going to be a list of all of the items that we want to add to the inventory. In this case, since the user clicked on the key, we only want to add that to the inventory. but in some cases, such as when we are combining the key with the box, we want to add more items to the inventory at once, which is why a list is going to be useful in this case. So for this, we are only going to add one item into the list, which is going to be the key. So we're going to write 2 square brackets to create a list, and then we're going to say key. Now, before we go ahead and check if the user has clicked on any of the other items available, we are going to go ahead and create this addToInventory function. So we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here, and then we're going to make sure that we are in the correct indentation, like so. And then we're going to say def addToInventory, and then we can call the argument items, like so. And inside of here, we are going to iterate through each of the items that we have passed as a parameter to this function, and then we're going to add those items into the inventory items list, as well as create sprites that we are going to reference inside of the environment sprites list. So we're going to say for item in items, and then we're going to say inventory items dot append item, like so. And now we're going to go ahead and add some images for these items, but because we have one environment item that can have 2 different states, which is namely the lantern, which can be lit or unlit, we need to make sure that we're adding the correct version of this image as a child to the item's sprite. So we're going to create an if statement, which is going to check if the current item in this for loop is the lantern. So we're going to say if item is equal to lantern, then we're going to say item image is equal to image, and then inside of here we're going to say inventory items slash inventory lantern unlit dot png. And that is because when we're adding the lantern item into the inventory, it should be unlit as a standard, and then when we are combining the matches item together with this, it should then be lit. And now we're going to check if the item is not lantern, so we're going to say else, and in this case we're going to create an image with a formatted string path so that we don't have to manually create all of the different images for each of the items. So we're going to say item image is equal to image inventory items inventory dash, and then we're going to create 2 curly brackets, and then we're going to say dot png, like so. And now we're going to make sure that we are formatting this string so that these 2 curly brackets are going to be replaced with the current item's name. So we're going to say dot format, and then we're going to pass in the item as the parameter for this format function, like so. And now we want to make sure that we are creating the sprites for these items, and we're going to do this the same way as we have done before with the environment items. So we're going to create a few empty lines, and then we'll make sure that we are in the correct indentation, like so. And then we're going to create a transform. So we're going to say t for transform is equal to transform child is equal to item image, and then we'll give this a zoom property of 0.5, like so. And then we'll add this as a child to the sprite. So we're going to say inventory sprites dot append, so that we are adding the sprite as a reference to this inventory sprites list, and then we're going to use the sprite manager in order to create the sprites. So we're going to say inventory sm, which is what we call the sprite manager object for the inventory, dot create, and then we'll pass in the transform as a child to this sprite, like so. Next, we're going to create some attributes for these sprites, and these are going to contain different values, which are going to help us in different ways later on in the script. The first 2 we're going to create is going to be the width and the height of these sprites, but because they are sharing the same size as the inventory slots, we are first going to create a new global variable which is going to contain these values. And that is because later on in various parts of our script, we're going to want to reuse this width and height in different ways, such as in calculations. And instead of having to remember what this width and height is, we can just reference to this global variable, which will remember this for us. So we're going to scroll down into the start label, and then we're going to create this global variable. So we're going to say inventory slot size is equal to, and we're going to create a new tuple which is going to contain the width and the height, and these are going to be 215 divided by 2, which is the width, and because we have resized the slot to be half of its size on the screen, we are dividing this value by 2, and then for the height it's going to be 196 divided by 2, like so. And now we can go ahead and create another variable straight away, and this one is going to contain the padding between each of the slots. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate this line, and then we're going to rename the variable to inventory slot padding, and the value is going to be 22 pixels divided by 2 in order to get the correct value. And now we're going to create another variable, and this one is going to contain the position of the first slot in the inventory. So we're going to duplicate this line like so, and then we're going to rename this variable to inventory first slot X, like so. And then this value is going to be 350 pixels, like so. So now that we have that done, let's go back up into our addToInventory function. And in here, we're going to add the two attributes to our sprites. So we're going to say inventory sprites at the position of -1, which will grab the last item in this list, which is the sprite that we had just created, dot width is equal to, and then we're going to use the tuple variable that we just created. So we're going to say inventory slot size at the position of 0 to get the first value of the tuple, and then we'll do the height attribute as well. So we're going to duplicate this like so, and then we'll change width to height, and we'll swap the 0 instead of these brackets for a 1 to get the second value. And then we'll add some of the other attributes as well. So I'm going to duplicate this line, and this attribute is going to hold what type of item that this is. So we're going to remove this, and then we're going to say type is equal to, and then we'll use the item variable for this for loop in order to get the item type. The next variable is going to hold the item image for this sprite. So we're going to duplicate this line, and then we're going to say item image is equal to item image, like so. The next thing we're going to do is to position this inventory item on the screen, and to do that we're going to use the Y attribute that is available for all sprite objects. So let's go ahead and duplicate this line, and then we're going to say dot Y instead of item image is equal to, and the Y position is going to be 608, like so. And this value is going to be shared amongst all of the inventory items, as they are all going to be positioned in one row at the bottom of the screen. But now, since a inventory item should be able to be dragged around on the screen, then this attribute's value is going to change as the item is being dragged. But if the user releases this item on the screen without combining it with something else, then we want the item to revert back to its original position. And in order to allow that, we need a way to be able to store the original position of this sprite. So we're going to duplicate this line, and then we're going to create a new attribute which is going to store this original value. So we're going to call this attribute original Y, like so. Now, since this video has already gotten quite long, we're going to pause it here and then continue in the next video. And in that part, we're going to create a new function, and this function is going to help us to position each of the inventory sprites on the x-axis. And we're going to call this function from this addToInventory function, and we will also call this function from other places in the script, such as when an inventory item has been deleted, or when we are using the arrow buttons in the inventory in order to reveal more items. So this function is basically going to reposition each of the items so that no gaps are formed and so that new items can be added in the correct slot. So I thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this tutorial series is interesting and useful to many of you, and I hope to see you in the next video.